Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We have been away for holidays for a bit, but now we're back to having our fireside chats. And today we're talking about a topic that it's very timely and relevant. We're talking about sustainability in smart cities and how can we all work to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. How can we finance innovation that are aligned with that purpose? And what is the role of connectivity as a foundation of smart cities and sustainable financing? Because monitoring and reporting, it's quite important to make that happen, especially in smart cities and Industry 4.0. And if we're working to make cities smarter, what is the role that technology such as blockchain can play in adding transparency and help tackling the sustainable development goals? So just for the background, these sustainable development goals were made just to make the cities and the world a better place and healthier for all citizens. It spans across education, healthcare, reduction of carbon emissions. So, I mean, Alexey is way more educated than me in this topic, and he's going to tell us more now. So what we have seen is that industries and governments right now are working towards finding solutions in order to meet those goals, and all of us being more sustainable in the way that we build cities and make business. But as usual, there is a huge problem or a huge bottleneck in all of these innovations, that it's the access to investment. And that's exactly what Alexey and Evercity do. And Alexey, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this morning to talk about what you do. Can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Hi everyone. Thanks for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here today. So my name is Alexey Shadrin. I have a background in economics and finance, but it was like my education. But then I started my career in sustainable consulting business and developing climate projects, and also that was like the first part of my career. And then after visiting the Paris Climate Conference in 2015, I realized that less consulting is needed and more action is what the world needs. And the action, particularly in innovations that might help us to reach sustainable development goals, combat climate change. But to bring those innovations to the market, we need financing. And innovations and financing was my main focus since 2015. We had a deep dive into digital innovations, of course, because it's the zeitgeist of our time and everything. So we made some really great interesting innovations in this regards, reaching sustainable finance and Industry 4.0 technologies. And I will be happy to talk about this today within this chat.
Thanks. And I think it would be interesting to hear a little bit about Evercity, the company that you started, and what do you do in this space?
Yeah. As I already mentioned, since 2015, myself and my team, we were doing R&D in terms of digital technologies for climate finance and climate change mitigation. And we made a lot of R&D. We made the world's first carbon credit transaction on the blockchain. But it was the early years. We struggled to commercialize all that. And following our learning curve, we realized that those technologies are really helpful for investors to increase transparency of their sustainable investments, to give them a better understanding of what their investments are really doing. And those investors are willing to pay for that services. So we kind of found the market fit. And this is how Evercity company was started, as an incentive to commercialize those early R&D efforts with blockchain, with smart sensors, with drones. So we realized we need to build a digital platform that would connect institutional impact investors and impact projects in developing countries with the power of blockchain that can store the data on the financial transactions and impact that come from this finance project, and also combine blockchain with monitoring tools like sensors, drone, and satellites to collect the physical impact data and to give the understanding to investors what exact impact are their investments making. So just literally mining the physical data from various projects in developing countries, analyzing them, and then turning them into reports according to international standards, or using this data to issue various sustainable finance instruments digitally using the power of blockchain.
Wow, that's really interesting. There are a lot of things in the mix, right? And I guess that it's such a complex platform. The first question that comes to my mind, and it's having worked in smart cities and looking at the different applications that are deployed in smart cities. So I am a smart city application owner and I want to deploy in a city. How does Evercity helps me get funding or helps the investor find me as an owner of an application?
Yeah, so Evercity connects investors and projects, but it's not like in crowdfunding or some other matching platforms. We focus on specific financial instruments that are most common for sustainable finance markets. So, for example, our main focus right now are green bonds. This is a rapidly growing market. It grows like 30-40% each year despite of the crisis. It has grown up even last year, and it's growing this year as well, because green bonds are special bonds that are issued to finance specifically green activities, and those activities have a special definition, and there are lots of standards that actually can tell you whether this activity is green or not. For example, the EU taxonomy that everybody is talking about this year, but also there are other standards. And on top of the bond itself, the financial instruments, there is a huge layer related to all these standards and how you should measure the impact, how you should report it, and how you should do all sorts of stuff regarding the green properties of your project. So it's like a really big layer, and we help the issuers. So for example, if you want to deploy your technologies in a city, and that this technology and this project actually can bring carbon reductions or some other impact on the sustainable development goals. So we help you on 3 stages. We help you to draft a special document which is called the Green Asset Framework, the Green Framework, or the Green Bond Framework. So it's literally a document that describes everything around the green properties of your project. So we do it in a semi-automatic mode, and you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to pay a lot to consultants. You can just answer some simple questions about your project, and the biggest part of this framework will be originated automatically, and then you would just need to tune it and verify it with a third party, and then you got your green labeling for your bond. And that means that investors would be will be paying additional interest to your bond, because everyone wants to invest in green, and green investments are more sustainable in the long run. So there are many reasons for investors to invest in your green bond as opposed to your vanilla or conventional bond. Then there is this next stage. We have the unique blockchain open source protocol that allows you to issue bonds on the blockchain. So this is something uniquely done using Web3 technologies, and it's an open source technology as well. So we encourage people to use it, and we help them to structure and issue their bonds on the blockchain. And the third part, finally, is the monitoring and reporting part, because when you design your green bond framework, you have to indicate how frequently you will report, against which standard, what indicators will you report, and how you will calculate them. So it's like a big, big deal, and you have to, waste a lot of time on preparing those documents and reports, and this is a barrier to entry to this market. So with our monitoring and reporting part, we can also make some monitoring in an automated way. For example, use satellites or plug in your sensors to our system to receive the renewable energy output, for example, or energy savings in terms of energy efficient equipment. And then we can create reports in a semi-automatic manner in line with your green framework and in line with your issuance. And the last thing about our product is that you can do it all together, so it will save you a lot of time, money, and make things really simple. Or if you have other plans, so you can just use each product separately. So you can issue your bonds with the regular, bank or exchange, or you can attract investment in some other form, but you can use our monitoring features or any other part of the product separately. So that's it.
That's really interesting. I guess there are a few things that businesses, because we're always conscious of producing our products and getting our products out of the market, that there are certain things that we're not really paying attention, not because they're not important, just because they take too much time. So one of these things are how to be sustainable, or how do we prove that we're being sustainable. The other thing for us, for example, is cybersecurity. So we have a very similar approach to cybersecurity, and how do we assess that the different software products that we're using comply to the different standards, and add this layer of transparency for whoever is consuming those products. And I guess the next step would be, okay, so accessing finance, it's great, but I guess there are also some regulatory frameworks that, if they're not here yet, they're going to be here in the future, right? So you mentioned the EU taxonomy. Is that likely to end up being a regulatory framework that we all should be compliant to as businesses?
Yeah, thanks for this question. It's a great question. So first, in our approach, we do not reinvent, the wheel, and our work is always based on those taxonomies and methodologies that are widely acknowledged by the international market. And they were introduced, of course, to standardize the approach to identifying green projects, measuring their impact, and making this whole global market a bit more structured, so that we could understand each other as investors, as projects, and stick to some common frameworks. Unfortunately, there is no single common framework for everyone right now, and this is a problem of the sustainable finance and green finance market. But very knowledgeable, experienced experts are working on that, and we see around the globe various standardization initiatives popping up and trying to make some structure and establish interconnections. So when we're talking about the EU taxonomy, of course, it's a great initiative. It's very deep. It has been thought of, I think, for many years, and it's a very professional thing. Although it's really complicated and people really struggle to understand it, but there is a room for improvement. But answering your question, mainly EU taxonomy is something for the European Union. So it's approved on the European level, and from the next year, January the 1st, every financial institution and most of the big companies in Europe will have to comply with the EU taxonomy and report on their EU taxonomy alignment of their portfolios. So it's a big deal, and taxonomy is bigger than just reporting on the alignment, because the EU taxonomy will be used in the EU green bond standard, and that means that most of the green bond issuers in Europe should first screen their portfolio or their assets according to taxonomy alignment. And this is an important criteria for the green finance. Okay, that's the EU thing, but all other countries are looking at the European Union as the leader, as the global leader, and the first, bloc, the first kind of country, right, that introduced the taxonomy for green activities. And now all other countries are trying to do the same based on the EU taxonomy. So we could say cautiously, but most probably, that all the other taxonomies that are being designed now, like in ASEAN taxonomy for the ASEAN region, like the Chinese taxonomy, like other taxonomies that are being designed all over the world, they are inspired and based on the EU approach and the EU taxonomy. So if you comply with the EU taxonomy, most probably you would comply with all other taxonomies all around the globe. So this thing is just starting, and I think in the future years we would see more standardization on this market.
That's great, because it means like if you're compliant to one, then your go to market into other new markets, it's going to be more direct, because you're compliant to the one that it's kind of being the state of the art for all of the other ones.
Absolutely.
So I want to dig a little bit deeper on who's actually getting the investment, right? Which are the areas that you see that are kind of like being like kind of like the top five that are proving to be sustainable and that are actually generating the most impact, which is actually what you are measuring?
Yeah. So if you look at the global breakdown of impact investments, you would see that the first two sectors are clearly renewable energy, which is, of course, like the key to the green transition, right? And the global energy transition is very important right now. So it's like the main sector, and it's really easy to measure, like just connecting sensors, etc. So the second one would be, farming and agriculture, land use. So it's also very important. It's related with the core sustainable development goals and values. We need food to sustain ourselves, and this food should be sustainable as well, should emit less CO2 emissions, because land use is a huge source of GHG emissions. So it's a very important sector, and a lot of impact investors invest in this sector. And here the use of telecoms is really, by the way, is really important. Then goes the transportation, which is also very important for cities, and connecting cities and villages and the infrastructure. So the transportation is key for exchanging goods and everything. Also, there are some other sectors, like, of course, manufacturing, and we need to make our production more energy efficient and greener. And also, I think, maybe not the biggest sector, but maybe one of the most important and most interesting to investors, which is growing. I think the IT sector should be mentioned as well, because really digitization brings a lot of benefits to all the other sectors and enhances the sustainable development of each industry and each sector that I mentioned before, and many others. And if we look at the governmental strategies, and if we look at the UN report and communications, we might see that digitization is key to achieving green transformation in every industry that was mentioned before. So it's of most importance.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you, right? Like, there is a level of dependency in all of the IT infrastructure, cloud infrastructure, telecoms infrastructure being kind of like the pipes of all of that data to be collected and transmitted. So do you think that with the advancement of global advanced networks, having them accessible everywhere, it can truly unlock sustainable finance?
Yeah, I think it is true, and I think maybe it's might be one of the main drivers of sustainable finance. We've been exploring, researching this topic ourselves and with our partners in the UN and in the Climate Change Coalition, which is a global association uh, of more than 260 members from more than 50 countries from around the globe, officially supported by the UNFCCC Secretariat. And, we've been doing some research papers and interviews and, market research to understand what might be the impact. And we came to a conclusion that the problems that actually were the barriers to the growth of the sustainable finance markets, like low transparency of impact outcomes and low accountability of the physical impact, and also the problem of trust between investors and impact projects. These were like the main problems, and it was not possible to solve them without digital technologies like blockchain and other communication technologies that are now available. And without them, those markets were really kind of not really efficient, closed to private money, very monopolistic or oligopolistic. They were driven by development finance institutions or some players that were there for since the beginning and that were not doing things really efficient. And SMEs struggled to and still struggling to receive this kind of investment because it's complicated, it's costly to structure all those deals and instruments. And now digital technologies really enable that, really bring trust, really bring transparency, traceability, and also significantly raise the efficiency and cost efficiency of this process. So I think in this decade we would see the rapid growth of this market, which is great because many projects would get opportunities to receive sustainable finance because they're doing sustainable activities, sustainable things that are good for our planet and our economies and people and nature. And that's great because those barriers will be moved by those digital technologies. This is obvious not only for us and the Climate Change Coalition, but also for UN Secretary General and other UN agencies who also issued their own reports regarding that through these years, and also for nations and countries like Europe, because if we look at the recovery package which Europe has endorsed last year, it has the name Green Digital Recovery Package. So the word digital is something that is close to the word green, and that means that Europe is combining these two trends, to sustain its leadership and fulfill its ambitious goals to become carbon neutral by 2050. And this is not only the case for Europe, it's the same for Singapore, it's the same for Great Britain, it's the same for US and China and other countries as well. So it's a convergence, it's a union of two global trends, and they would make a world a better place.
Yeah, I think that the point that you're making around convergence of technologies to actually unlock innovation, it's something that I have always had a real passion about. And instead of just building technology for the sake of building technology, let's try and make the impact on the healthcare, on the transport, and across all of the industries, right? And from my side, I've always looked at how telecoms networks can be an enabler and actually unlock all of these benefits, right? And how can it bring all of the values of all the other technologies that we're bringing, such as AI, blockchain, sensors, and all of the stuff that it's incredible that it's happening in the application layer. So I would like to understand a little bit better your monitoring aspect. So I'm a company that I do something around agri-farm. So I want to like expose and be transparent about how am I compliant to this taxonomy, and how dependent am I on existing connectivity? Who comes and builds that network for me to be able to issue all of that data? Who's the responsibility of?
Yeah, so if we talk about our business model and platform, we just integrate third-party monitoring tools like sensors, drones, satellites, or whatever tools it could be into our platform that works with all these standards, global standards and taxonomies, which are embedded into the core of the platform. So once we get this data from the sensors, we refine and analyze this data, and then we help the issuer or the farm or the one who wants to monitor and report on his impact results. We help them to create the reports and report according to those standards. But if we're talking about more broadly about, how do we measure stuff and how do we make this more accessible, then of course telecommunications networks are of great importance, because, for example, we cannot measure everything from satellites, and we might need, to place sensors on site and connect them to the internet and get this data from the sensors. Or we might need, the drone or the camera's data to detect something, illegal activities, for example, or assess the conditions of the farm, for example, using the computer vision. So here we need the connection, and the connection should be accessible to people in developing countries, because we're talking about the most vulnerable people and countries. And those networks should be affordable to people, and ideally somehow incentivize people. So if those infrastructure can also belong to people partly or fully, this might also make additional incentives. And in our mind, we have a really long-term concept of our business. We want to at some point become more of a data-driven company and collect the physical impact data from many projects across the globe, and then reward people for giving away this data, because data is not free and data costs something. This is a fight that people need to stand up for in this current market, and fight back their data and monetize their data, because right now the situation is like only one-sided, and providers are just taking away our data, doing businesses, selling this data to other guys, and not giving us anything back. So I think when we will be able to own our own infrastructure, telecommunications infrastructure, partly or fully, not only we will be able to collect more data and analyze it to do the reporting or to attract additional money, but also somehow monetize it and sell it to anyone. So I think also what you're doing is really very relevant for our work and the future of not only telecommunications but also future well-being of people. That's one of the most important things that we are working for.
Yeah, I mean, technology for the good, right, instead of for the evil. That the point that you're making around, you made several points that I think are super interesting, and we could talk for ages about it. But the use of data in networks. So when we talk to cities, right, and they want to become the next smart city, there is one of the biggest issues, that it's the siloed approach to the data, right? So I have a transport network, and I can gather data about traffic flows or about anything, any kind of data, right, that my sensors are grabbing. Mm-hmm. I have, for example, a healthcare system that it's monitoring where there are, for example, people that need care, and I'm doing telehealth, right? So why can I not cross this data on a single platform so I can make better decisions on how to plan my routes, for example, for social carers to go and be more efficient, cross-referencing it with the transport data that I have. And the conclusion that we came up is that there is no shared governance layer that can adapt, first of all, add the transparency layer for that data to be anonymized and that it can be used cross-sector. But also, like, there is a lack of, or not a lack, but I think there is a level of skill set that needs to be happening around government and around municipalities and cities, in order to adopt all of these technologies so that we can actually become data-driven cities, right? And across the stack, how can we use the telecoms networks in a shared way, and how can we share the data across the different sectors? And I think the angle that you're bringing to it, which is how can we use this data for cross-sector innovation and to make sure that we're more sustainable in all of the sectors that involve the well-being of our citizens, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I do agree with you, and we are strong believers that data should firstly belong to people, and then there should be all sorts of ways and frameworks how to use this data and sell this data for various purposes. So of course there should be some layer, some opportunity to and some marketplace, maybe, by the way, for people to accumulate this data and then receive maybe requests by public services, by commercial companies, to use this data, and then sell this data to those users at various prices. And of course there should be another layer which should be fully interoperable and would allow to exchange the data and make sure that the data was not used many times for a single purpose, and make sure this kind of data traceability and interoperability. This is something very important, and although maybe it's not really obvious today what the solution should be and what is the ideal approach to that. We know that International Telecommunications Union is working a lot around that, and there are all sorts of working groups, to work out some approaches to this issue. Also, some other groups are working on that, but I think that the answer is not really far away, and I think each of our projects, I mean, Weaver Labs and Evercity, we are doing our own part of this equation as well.
Yeah, and we see that the good part of this is like, with this mission and this vision, we see that people are coming on board, and it's becoming more like a manifesto rather than just a business that we are building, which is what makes it drive. So I'm gonna just stop for a minute asking you questions to give the opportunity for people that are watching us to ask the questions, and we have a few coming up. So I think I'm going to go in order. So the first question is, it says, integration of technology is absolutely where we should be moving. How will we create uniformity of the data capture and establish standards across the globe? Sorry, is this already happening?
Yeah, this is a really hard topic, but it's really happening. And always there are, two ways: the bottom up and top down approach, right? So we can cope on some UN agency or framework like the Paris Agreement, for example, to give us a high level framework and criteria to which we should, stick. Like, also, International Telecommunications Union as a UN agency is doing a lot of work regarding standardization. OECD is doing something as well. But also, I'm a believer of the bottom-up approach as well. And this is more like the market approach, like a truly, free market. So many groups and companies and even people can come up with their own standards, right? And if this standard is really easy to use, and if it's a universal standard, if it's interoperable, then it will organically, like, merge with, other standards and become bigger and bigger, grow the user base. And this is actually what open source approach is all about. So I think, combining the open source approach and, combining the common good approach that can be, embedded into creation of such standards, and also paired with the decentralized governance of such standards, the bottom-up approach can work out and can, be a real alternative to the top-down approach, which has its own limitations, because our humanity and the nations are not, unfortunately, not really listening to each other. And each bloc, each country, each region comes up with their own standards, which at some point might be not a bad thing. And we can see from the past that, protectionistic measures really, made some sense. But I'm pretty sure that nowadays we need really global standards, and that nations and corporations should somehow, cope with it and support those activities. And now I think more than ever, people, societies, communities, cities, villages, they have the opportunity to create their own standards using Web3 and other digital technologies, by following these kind of approaches that I already mentioned. So I think more than ever, it's possible, but we'll see how this happens, and where does this two approaches meet, somewhere in the middle or somewhere else. So it's not a really easy topic, but it doesn't mean we should not aim for that, and we should not proceed further with our actions.
Yeah, I think like the topic of standards versus open source, it's a really interesting one. We had a chat with Red Hat about that in the telecoms context, but you can always have the community approach, which is the one that, of course, is going to give you a more diverse approach and point of view. And then you have the standards that puts kind of like a language to all of this story, right? So I really like your angle of like, let's see where these two meet and how we evolve. So moving to the next question, it says, what about the legal frameworks? We are talking about global technologies being implemented across a variety of legal frameworks. How can we move the dial there? Because if we're looking at different industries, I think it's a very interesting question.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, can you clarify this a bit for me? So there are legal frameworks and the technologies. So
we're talking about global technologies that are implemented across a variety of legal frameworks, right? Because each sector, I assume, it has a different legal framework. So how can you ensure that there is compliance across the variety of legal frameworks using a single approach, I guess, of reporting and measurement?
Yeah, thank you for that. So this is also not so easy, and of course there are universal frameworks that are somehow same for every sector. But for example, if we look at the EU taxonomy, we would see that for each sector there is something special, and each sector is different from each other. So while providing the common kind of a standard and approach, like an example of the taxonomy, okay, we have eligible activities, we have activities that are aligned with the taxonomy, we have some other common terms and ways of this screening or something. But at the same time, the criteria for each sector are really special. And unfortunately here, or fortunately, we have to rely on the sectoral knowledge and industrial knowledge, industrial experts. So I assume the self-governance of sectors and industries should also be very important here. So we should look both at some frameworks, high-level things, definitions, but for each industry, we should have a really crafted, very attentive approach to all the details that are relevant for the industry, and also the feedback from the industry is really of great importance. So so when we are developing our product, then of course we are deep diving in each industry and talking to experts and talking to businesses to better understand the needs of the industry and real needs. So that's not really easy, and I think this is maybe one of the main barriers that prevent the global penetration of all the digital technologies and the common approaches and standards, just because each industry is different from one another, and also there are regional differences as well.
Yeah, I guess like each jurisdiction will have the different legal frameworks as well that you need to be compliant to. But I guess
Yeah,
that's kind of solved with the different taxonomies being created by
yeah, I
sector.
think on the long term, when we will get more data around each industry in every region and the regulations there, and analyze this big data, then there could be more patterns and more kind of universal interfaces and frameworks to communicate between all those legislations and industrial specifics, and also global developments might at some point also lead to the common rules, like in the European Union, right? So we have the
Yeah.
rules there, the common market, and this is what brings us closer. So if we look at the macro trends in the human development, we are slowly walking towards that
Yeah.
integration. And of course, digital technologies enable that as well.
Of course. Yeah. 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 There's convergence in every single angle at the end of the day. Okay, so one more question says, rewarding for data sharing is a great idea, putting it back in the hands of people. However, how do we determine which data is 100% private and which data is public?
Good question. Thank you so much, and thanks for supporting this idea. I hope most of the people around the globe really support it, and so with their support, entrepreneurs can make this happen somehow. So yeah, this is a very good question, and I think again, if we assume that the data belongs to the originator of the data, then it's upon the originator, the owner of the data, to to say whether this data is private or public, and how it should be treated and how it should be kept. And of course, some of the data could be more private, like the data around your financial bills, your statements, your medical data, as opposed to your less important data, right? That you're ready to give away and publicly expose, and what you're already doing in your social networks, for example.
Yeah.
So I think the universal indicator here would be the price of the data. So if there is something more private that you value a lot, then it could be just priced more, and at some price you would be able to give away. But at the same time, you should keep your right to not to disclose this data, and keep it with you, and not to sell it, not to expose it in any way. And this should be your own decision, and I think it should be like an amendment to the human rights that your data is your essential right, and keeping it private is your essential right. I think this is something that we believe in as well. And
yeah, I think it's interesting, the point of like getting an incentive to share that data, but that incentive should be not only economic incentive, but also for the sake of, for example, compliance to the Sustainable Development Goals, right? So if I am a company and I share the data of how am I being compliant to all of these standards, then it benefits me as a company. So I contribute to the overall well-being. So I think getting into the different incentive schemes for people to be more motivated to share their data in a more controlled way, I guess it's where we should be looking at, right? It's not, okay, so maybe we get incentivized by getting better advertisements right now. Some people do. But I think we should also look at ways that those incentives benefit the entire society and not just the, the economic benefits of big companies. So I think we've talked a lot. I think we could still talk for a very long time, because this, what you're doing, Alexey, is fascinating. I think it's very timely, very, very important, and I think it's very much aligned in the stack of the Web3, which is at the end of the day a lot of different technologies that try to enable decentralized principles across different applications and industries. I want to thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me this morning and to share what you are doing.
Thanks, Maria. It's always a pleasure talking to you and discussing, the future of the industry with like-minded people. I also want to make lots of compliments to your project as well, which is very relevant, which empowers people, which gives additional, incentives. And with this, I'm wishing you all the best, and to all our viewers as well. Thanks for your support, and I'm sure that by discussing these things, by joining our forces, and supporting these ideas and applications, we can have the change that we need and make the world a better place for ourselves and our children. And
I love that closing. Let's leave it there. Thank you so much, everyone, and see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.